You won't believe what I went through during my college years. And honestly, I still can't fully process it. Imagine moving into a place where something just feels off, where there's always that one person who doesn't quite belong. You try to ignore it, tell yourself it's nothing, but deep down your instincts scream otherwise. That's exactly what happened to me, and looking back, I should have listened to them from the very start. My name is Brandon, and this all happened when I was in my second year of college. After my freshman year, I found myself scrambling for a place to live off campus. Dorm rooms were no longer an option and time was running out. In the end, I settled for a cooperative housing arrangement, a shared living community consisting of 3 houses located sort of near the university. It wasn't ideal. Actually, it was pretty inconvenient. But it was cheap, and at the time that was my main priority. I had a bike, so the extra commute didn't bother me much. Most of the other tenants were students like me, but not all. Some were alumni, others were grad students, and a few were older individuals pursuing their degrees later in life. But among them, one person immediately caught my attention, and not in a good way. She was an older woman, probably in her late 50s, though something about her appearance made her seem even older. Her hair was streaked with gray, her face was worn, and she moved with a slow, uneven gait as if she had a lingering back injury. Unlike everyone else, she never engaged with anyone. She rarely spoke, never smiled, and her expression was always eerily blank. It was hard to tell what she was thinking, or if she was thinking anything at all. At first, I assumed she had some sort of connection to the university. Maybe she was faculty or an alumnus. But no one ever explained her presence, and I never asked. The first really strange moment happened in our common kitchen. That alone was odd because each of the 3 houses had its own separate kitchen. There was no reason for her to be in ours. And yet there she was. She wasn't cooking, eating, or even pretending to be there for a reason. She just stood there. While the rest of us were talking, laughing, making dinner, and blasting music, she simply lingered in the background, watching. Not participating. Not acknowledging anyone. Just observing. And what disturbed me the most was that, on several occasions, I felt her gaze land directly on me. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just staring into space? Maybe I was being paranoid? But deep down I knew. She was watching me. And for some reason no one else seemed to care. Later that week I was in my room, buried in homework, when something made me glance out the window. And there she was. Standing in the middle of the street. Motionless. Staring up at me. It was late and the air outside was freezing, yet she didn't seem to care. Was she looking at my window? Or just in the general direction of the house? Either way, an uneasy feeling crept over me. Against my better judgment, I raised my hand in an awkward wave, thinking maybe she'd snap out of whatever trance she was in. But the second I did, my stomach dropped. Instead of waving back like a normal person, she suddenly jumped up and down like an excited child. Then, without warning, she turned and sprinted toward one of the other houses, presumably where she lived. My chest tightened. There was no denying it now. She had been staring directly at me. And now, thanks to my foolish wave, she knew which room was mine. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. When I asked one of my housemates about her, his response was unsettling. "Oh yeah, she's always been here," he said casually. "Just ignore her, man. That's what we all do." That answer wasn't enough for me. I pressed for more, but he shrugged, admitting he was just repeating what someone had told him when he moved in. That wasn't good enough. So I kept asking around until I found someone who knew a little more. A senior who lived in her specific house told me that she had some vague association with the university, was a little off, but wasn't known for being violent. I asked why no one found this as disturbing as I did, and his answer was frustrating. "We don't get to choose who lives here. That's up to the property manager." Fine. If no one else was going to care, I'd try to ignore it. But things didn't stop there. One night, I stepped out of my room and nearly collided with her. She was right outside my door. I physically jumped back, my heart slamming against my ribs. It was past midnight. The house was practically silent. And there she was. Just standing there. She didn't react to my presence. She didn't say a word. Instead, she simply turned and walked away as if I was the one intruding on her space. That was just one of many times I caught her snooping where she had no business being. But things escalated when I lost my room key. The 3 houses had once been part of an old hotel, so each bedroom had personal locks. Most residents didn't bother locking their doors, but I wasn't like most people. The thought of someone having unrestricted access to my room made my skin crawl. Losing that key was a huge deal. I had a spare, but getting a new copy was an expense I really didn't need at the time. Then a few nights later I woke up. I wasn't sure why until I heard it. A faint thump coming from my closet. Every 20 seconds or so, a soft shifting noise like something, or someone, was moving inside. My muscles tensed. My breath slowed. I'm not the type to freeze up in a crisis, but every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay very still. After a few deep breaths, I forced myself to move. I slid out of bed, heart pounding, and crept toward the closet door. In one swift motion, I ripped it open. My stomach lurched. He was in there. She stood inside my closet, her wide eyes locked onto mine, a kitchen knife clutched in one hand. Around her neck, she had my tie wrapped like a noose. I barely had time to process before she lunged at me, knife outstretched. A raw, primal scream tore from my throat. Instinct took over. I grabbed her wrist, using her frail frame against her as I wrestled her to the floor. She thrashed wildly, kicking, scratching, biting, but I held her down, yelling for help. Doors flew open. Footsteps pounded toward me. My friend Marcus rushed in and helped pin her down while someone else called the police. The rest of the night was chaos. The cops arrived quickly and took her away. She didn't fight back, didn't speak a word. Just let them drag her off. Then came the revelation that made my blood run cold. She was the property manager's sister. He had been secretly letting her live there. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of getting her help, he had dumped her into an empty room and left her there unchecked. He was later arrested for negligence, among other things, and honestly, I blame him more than her. But that doesn't erase what happened. He could have killed me. To this day, I don't know why she fixated on me. And I don't think I ever will. But one thing is certain, I'll never forget that night. This isn't technically my story, but I witnessed everything unfold right in front of me, so I feel compelled to share it. I've been living in a cozy 2-story house with my husband Patrick for nearly 2 decades. Our children have all grown up and moved out to pursue their own lives, and I couldn't be prouder of them. What I'm about to recount happened just last year, and even now I still can't shake the unsettling feeling it left behind. For the longest time, the house across the street had been empty, abandoned looking, and frankly, a bit of an eyesore. That's why I was relieved when someone finally moved in. Since I'm retired, I spend a lot of time on my front porch, reading, knitting, sipping tea, or simply enjoying the weather. Sometimes I listen to music. Other times I put on my favorite true crime podcasts, which in hindsight feels ironic given what eventually happened. The new neighbor was a young man, probably in his mid-20s. He had a sleek, expensive-looking car, one of those luxury European models that cost more than our house, and he dressed like someone who either had a lot of money or really wanted people to think he did. I don't want to give you the wrong impression, though. He wasn't arrogant or standoffish. In fact, he was incredibly polite. After settling in, he introduced himself as Jason, and he and Patrick hit it off instantly. They bonded over their love for sports, sharing college stories, and even discussing investments. Jason mentioned that he worked in entertainment, doing freelance gigs for some big-name internet influencers. I didn't fully understand what that entailed, but judging by his lifestyle, it seemed to be paying well. For months, everything seemed completely normal. Since I was always out on the porch, Jason would wave at me whenever he left or returned home, and I'd always wave back. That became our little routine. Then I started noticing a pattern, one that, at first, I didn't think much of. A young woman would frequently visit his house. She drove a white convertible, always arrived when Jason wasn't home, and let herself in with her own key. She was striking, blonde, fashionable, and, to be completely honest, she dressed in a way that caught attention. I assumed she was his girlfriend and maybe stopping by to check on things while he was away. But then something changed. One evening as I tended to my garden, I heard raised voices from across the street. Jason and the girl, who I later learned was named Vanessa, were arguing in the driveway. She was furious, waving her arms dramatically, her voice sharp and relentless. Jason, on the other hand, seemed more frustrated than angry, barely getting a word in before she stormed off, slamming the car door and speeding away. I wasn't one to meddle in other people's affairs, so I chalked it up to a lover's quarrel. Every couple fights, right? But here's where it got strange. Even after that explosive argument, Vanessa kept returning to his house. At first, I thought maybe they had made up, but Jason was never home when she showed up. I brought it up to Patrick, but he told me to mind my own business and not jump to conclusions. I tried to let it go. But then came the night that changed everything. It was well past midnight when Patrick and I were jolted awake by the sound of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through our bedroom window. We rushed outside along with several other neighbors to find Jason's house swarming with police officers. An ambulance was parked out front. My stomach dropped when I saw them escorting Vanessa out of the house in handcuffs. She didn't resist. She didn't scream or cry. She just walked forward with an eerie blank expression as if she had accepted her fate. Then I saw Jason. They wheeled him out on a stretcher and he was barely conscious. His face was bruised, his clothes soaked in blood. I gasped, covering my mouth as the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance. He disappeared behind the doors and I didn't see him again for an entire week. When he finally returned, Patrick and I went over to check on him. He invited us inside, visibly exhausted, but surprisingly open about what had happened. And what he told us was more disturbing than I ever could have imagined. Vanessa had stolen his spare house key and made a copy without his knowledge. At first he didn't think much of her occasional visits, but then she started demanding things. Lavish gifts, expensive trips, jewelry. The moment he hesitated, she became possessive, controlling. Their relationship spiraled into something suffocating and toxic. Jason tried to break up with her, but she refused. The argument I had overheard was his attempt to create distance, but she had other plans. Unbeknownst to him, she had been tracking his location through his phone. Worse, every time she entered his house while he was away, she wasn't just snooping, she was planting hidden cameras in his bedroom. The whole time she had been watching him. She knew when he was alone. She knew his schedule, his habits. And when he finally ended things for good, she snapped. The night of the attack, Vanessa had let herself into his house, armed with a knife. Jason woke up to find her standing over him. She lunged. In the chaos, he managed to fight back, but not before she inflicted serious injuries. The doctors told him he was inches away from needing emergency surgery, or worse. Patrick and I did our best to comfort him, but he was clearly shaken. Before we left, he sighed and said something that stuck with me. I learned my lesson about flaunting money. Some people will do anything to have what they can't. A month later, he moved out. He told us he didn't feel safe staying there, especially knowing that Vanessa had friends who might still know where he lived. And just like that, he was gone. We never saw him again. I can only pray he's somewhere far away, rebuilding his life. No one should have to go through something like that, especially not someone so young. When I decided to relocate, it was all about a new beginning. Without diving too deep into personal matters, let's just say that my previous life had been overwhelmed by a pretty toxic relationship, and staying in that same city became unbearable. A few lucky financial breaks in my early years led me down some questionable paths, and I ended up surrounding myself with the wrong people. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I settled into was a quiet, serene place. Low crime rates, family-oriented, and a perfect escape from the chaos. The homes were nicely spaced apart, offering a sense of privacy and distance, which is exactly what drew me in. However, there was one house that stood out from the rest, located right next to mine. Its layout was different. It felt almost too close to my own property in comparison to the other houses around. And when I first saw it, I was taken aback by its sheer size. I immediately assumed it was a family home big enough to fit a whole bunch of people. Grandparents, parents, kids, the works. But as time passed, I realized I couldn't have been more wrong. The first thing I decided to do, despite my social hesitations, was to introduce myself to my neighbors. For some odd reason though, I left the house next door for last. Maybe it was because everyone else I met seemed really warm and welcoming, with most of them being parents of young children. They all gave off an intimidatingly successful vibe, which had me questioning how I, a guy in my late 20s, could fit into this tight-knit community. But when I finally made my way over to meet the neighbor next door, my energy was drained. After spending a whole day making small talk with strangers, I wasn't really in the mood. Still, I pushed myself, figuring if I didn't do it now, I would never get around to it. As I walked up to the driveway, I expected to be greeted by someone in their mid-40s or so. But what I didn't anticipate was a young guy with a mullet opening the door. He looked younger than me, and that caught me off guard. But I quickly recovered and went into my standard neighborhood intro. As I was talking, he interrupted with a huge grin and said something like, "Wow, someone born in the same decade as me. That's a nice surprise." I laughed, and before I knew it, I found myself telling him about how out of place I felt in this quiet, family-dominated neighborhood. He reassured me, telling me not to worry about fitting in. According to him, most people here kept to themselves, which was actually a relief. He introduced himself as Luke and invited me over for a drink sometime. Feeling a little spontaneous, I shrugged and agreed, expecting him to laugh and maybe suggest we hang out later. But instead, he glanced into his living room as if he was assessing something. Then he turned back to me, apologizing and saying he couldn't hang out because of work. Naturally, I asked what he did for a living, to which he gave me a half-hearted smile and just said, "Finance." That was it. No details, no elaboration. I found that strange but didn't push it further. I asked if he lived there alone, to which he surprisingly confirmed. I thought it was odd, especially given how large the house was. He seemed pretty chill though, so I just chalked it up to my curiosity getting the best of me. We exchanged numbers and I went back home. At that point, I was excited to have a peer in the neighborhood. But that lingering thought about him living alone in such a massive place kept nagging at me. That was about 6 months ago. For weeks after our conversation, I didn't notice anything particularly unusual. I tried texting Luke to set up plans, but his responses were always the same. Too busy, not a good time. Eventually, I stopped trying to make it happen. I'm not the type to force things with someone who doesn't seem interested. But here's where things started to get a little odd. Luke's house was eerily silent. There were no visitors, no gatherings, no delivery orders, nothing. It was like the guy didn't even eat out, and his car was always parked in the driveway, suggesting he was home 24/7. It was unsettling to say the least. As someone who works from home, my office overlooks Luke's property. I know it sounds invasive, but his house was always in my line of sight, and I couldn't help but notice when there was no movement. I would glance over occasionally, just out of curiosity. Then one night, around 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, I was suddenly jolted awake by loud music. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but no, it was real. I peeked out my window and what I saw was beyond strange. Luke's driveway was filled with 7 or 8 cars. A party was happening next door. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm no stranger to noise, especially coming from house parties, but this was something else. The volume was out of control for a weeknight. I figured I'd be polite, so I threw on a hoodie and walked over to his place, expecting to knock on the door and politely ask him to turn it down. But when I knocked, there was no response. I pulled out my phone ready to text Luke, but I hesitated. I already knew he would probably ignore me or offer some excuse. The next morning, I knocked again, more insistently. This time, the door swung open on its own. I stepped inside and immediately saw a bizarre sight. A pile of shoes, at least 10 pairs, just lying there in the foyer. The house was quiet and there was no sign of anyone inside. I walked deeper into the house, half expecting to find a party in full swing. But instead, I was met with an unsettling emptiness. The only noise I could hear was faint, just a recorded loop of people talking, laughing, and clinking glasses. It was like the entire party was fake. It didn't make sense. The cars outside were real. The shoes in the foyer were real. But there was no one in the house. I had to know what was going on, so I kept searching. Eventually, I found a door that led to the basement. It was dark down there except for a faint light coming from deeper inside. As I approached, I started to hear a strange mechanical noise, like a saw cutting through something hard. A chill ran down my spine, but my feet kept moving. I crept closer, and what I saw next made my stomach turn. There were 3 men down there. Older guys, probably in their 50s or 60s. They were wearing heavy-duty work clothes, rubber gloves, and goggles. They were staring at something out of my line of sight. And then I realized it. There was a strange chemical smell in the air, something like bleach or industrial cleaner. My heart pounded as I backed away, suddenly feeling like I was in danger. As I turned to leave, I felt the dimming of the light behind me. The door had been shut. Panicked, I ran up the stairs, threw open the front door, and bolted back to my house. But I wasn't about to let Luke or anyone else know I had been snooping. The next morning I woke up, and to my surprise, Luke's house was completely quiet. His car was gone. The whole place seemed abandoned. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? There was no crime, just a strange occurrence. But what about the shoes, the cars, and the weird basement? What was really going on at Luke's house? If you found this story as intriguing as I did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another chilling tale. Join us at the Nightmare Archive. We've got plenty more spine-tingling stories ready to keep you on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned and stay curious.